Welcome to Nocturnal Ledger. There are places in this world where the fabric of reality is worn thin, eroded by the sheer weight of human suffering. In the annals of history, few locations have absorbed as much trauma, pain, and sudden death as the rolling hills of Adams County, Pennsylvania. We speak today of a small market town that, for 3 sweltering days in July of 1863, became the epicenter of an apocalypse. This is not merely a recitation of history, and this is a descent into the documented, terrifying aftermath of the Battle of Gettysburg. To understand the hauntings, one must first understand the harvest. Before the tourists, before the monuments, and before the ice cream shops, this was a slaughterhouse. 51,000 men fell here. In the span of 72 hours, a peaceful farming community was transformed into a necropolis. The soil drank more blood than it could hold. The air was so thick with the sulfur of gunpowder and the stench of death that it could be tasted for miles. When the armies finally retreated, they left behind a landscape of horror that defies modern comprehension. Bloated corpses lay rotting in the summer sun, their faces frozen in the final rictus of agony. Amputated limbs were piled like cordwood outside makeshift field hospitals. The screams of the dying, men who would linger for days without water or morphine, created a cacophony that witnesses said sounded like the howling of the damned. It is from this seedbed of agony that the legends grow. But to call them legends is a disservice to the thousands of witnesses who have reported, with shaking voices and pale faces, that the Army of the Potomac and the Army of Northern Virginia never truly left. We are looking at a phenomenon that parapsychologists call a residual haunting, a recording of intense energy imprinted onto the environment itself. When the geology of Gettysburg, rich in quartz and granite, is believed by many researchers to act as a massive battery, storing the electromagnetic imprint of high-stress events. And there is no stress higher than the violent separation of the soul from the body. Let us begin with the most compelling and terrifying type of evidence: the time slip. This is not a standard ghost story where a transparent figure walks through a wall. A time slip is a total immersion, a momentary glitch in the universe where the witness is transported back to the moment of the event. The most famous and rigorously documented case occurred at Pennsylvania Hall on the campus of Gettysburg College. During the battle, this Greek revival building was commandeered by Confederate forces and used as a major field hospital. The floors were slick with gore. Surgeons worked around the clock, sawing through bone and flesh without anesthesia, throwing severed arms and legs out the windows until the piles reached the second story. Decades later, on a quiet night, 2 college administrators were working late on the 4th floor. The year was much later, long after the war, in the era of electricity and modern order. As they finished their work, they stepped into the elevator, intending to go down to the ground floor to exit the building. They pressed the button for the 1st floor. The elevator descended, but it did not stop at the 1st floor. It continued past the lobby, sinking into the darkness of the basement. When the doors slid open, the 2 administrators were not looking at a storage room or a boiler. The electric light of the elevator spilled out into a scene from hell. They saw a room illuminated by the flickering, smoky light of lanterns. The air rushed in, hot and heavy with the metallic smell of fresh blood and the sickening sweetness of rotting flesh. Before them, But the basement was packed with wounded soldiers lying on makeshift cots and on the cold floor. The administrators, frozen in sheer terror, watched as men in blood-soaked gray uniforms moved frantically among the wounded. In the center of the room, a surgeon with a blood-stained apron was actively amputating a soldier's leg. The scene was not silent. It was deafening. They heard the moans, the orders being barked, the rasp of the saw. The most chilling detail, but the one that keeps researchers awake at night, is what happened next. One of the orderlies in the room, a man from 1863, looked up. He looked directly at the elevator. He locked eyes with the administrators. His expression was one of confusion and desperate plea. This implies that this was not just a recording. If he saw them, then for a brief second, the timeline of the living and the timeline of the dead had intersected. The administrator frantically hammered the button for the upper floor, and the doors closed, sealing the vision away, and the elevator ascended. When they later investigated, the basement was just a basement. Concrete, storage, silence. But the description they gave matched historical records of the hospital layout exactly, details they had no way of knowing. This event remains one of the most credible accounts of a time slip in American history, suggesting that beneath our feet, the hospital is still operating, the surgeries are still happening, and the soldiers are still dying, trapped in an eternal loop of suffering. Moving out from the town and into the battlefield itself, we approached the area known as Devil's Den. Even without the ghosts, this place is unsettling. It is a chaotic jumble of massive granite boulders, a geological anomaly that became a sniper's paradise during the second day of battle. Confederate sharpshooters wedged themselves into the crevices, picking off Union officers on the nearby Little Round Top. The fighting here was hand-to-hand, brutal and primal. Bodies fell into the deep fissures between the rocks and could not be retrieved for weeks. Today, Devil's Den is notorious for electronic malfunctions. Cameras with full batteries die instantly. Perfectly functioning video equipment records static or distorted screams. But the true horror of Devil's Den is the helpful soldier. Numerous tourists, spanning decades of reports, have described encountering a man in this area. He is described as disheveled, barefoot, wearing a floppy hat and ragged clothes that look like homespun butternut fabric, typical of Confederate infantry. He doesn't look like a ghost. He looks like a reenactor, solid and real. He often approaches visitors, particularly those struggling with cameras or looking at maps. He points toward the Plum Run stream and says simply, "What you're looking for is over there." When the visitors turn to thank him or to ask for a photo, he is gone, vanished in the blink of an eye in an area with no cover other than the rocks they are standing on. However, the interactions can be far more sinister. There is a documented report from a woman who was taking photographs of the rocks early in the morning, seeking the morning mist. She felt a presence behind her, an intense feeling of being watched that made the hair on her arms stand up. She turned and saw nothing. But when she developed her film later, one photo stood out, but it was a picture of a large boulder. Standing next to it was a shadowy figure, not quite solid but clearly wearing the uniform of a Civil War soldier. He was looking directly at the camera. The expression on his face was not peaceful. It was a scowl of intense malice. This aligns with the darker energy of the den. Many visitors report a sensation of being pushed or grabbed by unseen hands. One specific crevice in the rocks is known to remain unnaturally cold, even in the height of the humid Pennsylvania summer. Thermal scanners have recorded temperature drops of 30 degrees in a matter of seconds in this specific spot, often accompanied by the faint smell of gunpowder and stale pipe tobacco. Just across the valley lies Little Round Top, the site of the legendary defense by the 20th Maine Regiment. Here, the haunting takes on a grander, more auditory scale. It is not uncommon for park rangers and visitors to report the sounds of phantom regiments. No, we are talking about the distinct, rhythmic sound of drum rolls and the heavy tread of marching boots on gravel, heard clearly in the dead of night when the park is closed and empty. In the late 1990s, a group of Civil War reenactors was camping near the area, engaging in a period-correct immersion. As the sun set, they saw a regiment of Union soldiers marching out of the tree line. The reenactors assumed it was another group arriving for the event. They watched as the soldiers formed a line, their movements precise, their uniforms dirty and tattered. The reenactors waved, but the marching soldiers did not acknowledge them. As the column moved into the open field, a thick mist began to rise from the ground. The soldiers marched into the mist and simply dissolved. When the reenactors checked with the event organizers the next morning, they were told that no other units were scheduled to arrive, and no one had been in that sector of the park. They had witnessed the ghostly echo of the men who held the line in 1863. Perhaps the most heart-wrenching location is the Sachs covered bridge. Spanning Marsh Creek, this beautiful wooden structure hides a gruesome history. During the Confederate retreat, 3 Confederate soldiers were allegedly caught and accused of being spies or deserters. The details vary, but the outcome was the same. They were hanged from the rafters of the bridge. The bridge is a magnet for paranormal investigators, and the evidence collected here is staggering. Electronic voice phenomena, or EVPs, are captured regularly. Voices whispering, "Help me," "Cold," and "I didn't do it," have been recorded on high-fidelity audio equipment. But the physical manifestations are what drive visitors away in terror. One specific account comes from a skeptic, a man who went to the bridge on a dare. He stood in the center of the dark tunnel of the bridge at midnight, lighting a cigarette. As the smoke drifted up, he saw it swirl and coalesce into the shape of a human head. Then he felt a physical touch, a cold, damp sensation, like a wet rope tightening around his neck. He couldn't breathe. He fell to his knees, clawing at his throat, gasping for air. His friends dragged him out of the bridge. As soon as he crossed the threshold back onto the dirt road, the pressure released. When they examined his neck by the light of a car's headlights, they saw a distinct red welt encircling his throat, complete with the texture of a coarse rope. The haunting of Gettysburg is not limited to the visual or the auditory. It is olfactory. It is a haunting of the senses. The phantom smell is a widely reported phenomenon. In the wheat field, where the fighting was a confused, bloody swirl of attacks and counterattacks, visitors frequently report the overpowering scent of peppermint. This seems out of place until one looks at the historical record. Many soldiers carried peppermint oil to mask the smell of decomposition and to help with the dysentery that plagued the armies. They would put a drop on a cloth and tie it around their faces. The smell of peppermint in the wheat field is the ghost of a desperate attempt to hide the stench of death. We must also discuss the Farnsworth House. The brick walls of this structure in downtown Gettysburg are pockmarked with hundreds of bullet holes, scars from the battle that raged through the streets. And the attic of the Farnsworth house was occupied by a Confederate sharpshooter who spent days firing through a small garret window. He was eventually killed in that attic. Guests who stay in the Farnsworth house, which now operates as an inn, report an oppressive heaviness in the air. The sensation of a heavy weight sitting on the chest while sleeping is common, a phenomenon often associated with sleep paralysis. But here, it happens with alarming frequency to people who have never experienced it before. One guest reported waking up in the middle of the night to the sound of heavy breathing in the corner of the room. The room was pitch black, but he could hear the distinct sound of a metallic object being worked, click, clack, like the loading mechanism of a rifle. He lay frozen in bed as the sound of footsteps moved across the floorboards toward the bed, the mattress depressed as if someone had sat down next to him. Then a voice, clear as a bell, whispered right into his ear, "Don't move." The guest lay there until dawn, terrified, unable to turn his head. What are we to make of these thousands of stories? Are they mass hysteria? Are they the result of overactive imaginations fueled by history books? Skeptics would say yes. They would point to the power of suggestion. But that explanation fails to account for the witnesses who knew nothing of the history. It fails to account for the children who ask their parents why the funny man in the gray suit is crying by the tree. It fails to account for the audio recordings, the thermal drops, and the physical marks left on the living. There is a theory in the paranormal community that Gettysburg is a thin place. In Celtic mythology, a thin place is a location where the veil between this world and the other world is porous. The sheer release of kinetic and emotional energy in July 1863 tore a hole in that veil. The trauma was so great that the land itself cannot forget it. The soldiers who died at Gettysburg did not die peacefully in their beds. They died in chaos, in fear, in sudden, violent shock. Many of them did not know they were dead. One moment they were charging a hill. The next, they were gone. Or it is entirely plausible within the realm of paranormal theory that they are simply continuing their orders. They are holding the line. They are marching to the front. They are waiting for a relief column that will never arrive. Consider the phantom train of Gettysburg. Although the railroad was not fully completed at the time of the battle, the cut for the track was there, and it was the site of a massacre. People living near the tracks today report the sound of a steam engine, yet the whistle and the chugging of wheels followed by the screams of men. But there is no train. Is it possible that the haunting is not just of the men, but of the time itself? That the entire year of 1863 is overlaid onto the present like a double exposure photograph? The Iverson's Pits area offers perhaps the most disturbing evidence of this. General Alfred Iverson led his North Carolina brigade into a slaughter. They walked into a trap, and a Union volley mowed them down in a perfect line, and they fell where they stood. They were buried in shallow trench graves right there in the field. For years after the war, local farmers refused to work that land. They claimed the wheat grew taller and darker there, fed by the blood. But more terrifyingly, they reported that on humid nights, the ground would glow. This is not folklore. This is a phenomenon known as corpse candles or foxfire, caused by the bioluminescence of fungi on decaying matter. But the witnesses described it not as a natural glow, but as shapes, human shapes rising from the earth. To this day, Visitors to Iverson's pits report an overwhelming feeling of sadness. Strong men break down weeping for no apparent reason. It is an emotional contagion, a psychic residue of the despair felt by those North Carolina boys who realized, in their final moments, that they were being led to their deaths for nothing. We must also touch upon the orphanage. And the National Soldiers' Orphan Homestead in Gettysburg has a history that rivals any horror movie. After the war, an orphanage was established to care for the children of the fallen. However, the headmistress, a woman named Rosa Carmichael, was a sadist. She tortured the children, chaining them in a dungeon in the cellar. Ghost tours that enter this cellar today report aggressive activity. People are scratched. Children on the tours often refuse to enter, claiming they see scary kids hiding in the corners. A doll kept in the cellar is said to move on its own. The evil here is different from the battlefield. The battlefield is tragic. The orphanage is malicious. It is a concentrated pocket of cruelty that has stained the building's very foundation. As we traverse the town, the stories are endless. The ghostly woman seen in the window of the Tilly Pierce house, the phantom horseman who rides down the Emmitsburg Road, vanishing just before he strikes oncoming traffic. The smell of cigar smoke in the Jenny Wade house, where the only civilian casualty of the battle was killed while baking bread. But let us return to the central question. Why here? Why does Gettysburg persist when other battlefields fall silent? Perhaps it is the unfinished business. The Civil War was a fracture in the American soul, a wound that never fully healed. The men who died here were fighting for the very existence of their nations, Union or Confederate. That level of conviction does not simply dissipate. The documentation is there. Police reports from the 1970s detail calls from terrified residents reporting shooting in the fields, only for officers to arrive and find silence. Park rangers, men and women of science and law enforcement, have gone on record with their unexplainable experiences. These are not people seeking fame. These are people who have been confronted with the impossible. When you walk the fields of Gettysburg at twilight, when the tourists have gone and the mist begins to curl around the monuments, you can feel it. The silence is not empty. It is heavy. It is a silence that is holding its breath. If you listen closely, past the sound of the wind in the trees, you might hear the faint, rhythmic beat of a drum. You might catch the scent of black powder on the breeze. You might see a shadow move in the corner of your eye, a shadow that wears a kepi and carries a musket. They are still there. The 51,000. They are waiting in the rocks of Devil's Den. They are marching across the fields of the peach orchard. They are suffering in the basement of Pennsylvania Hall. They are the eternal sentinels of a war that, for them, has never ended. This is the reality of the Nocturnal Ledger. We document the echoes. We tally the cost. And at Gettysburg, the ledger is written in blood, and the final balance has yet to be paid. Sleep well, if you can, but remember, when you visit the places where history bled, you are never truly walking alone. This has been a Nocturnal Ledger investigation,